Imagine having access to a tribe of mentors consisting of some of the best tech leaders in the world, people you may have never heard of, but who in just an hour, you'll know their unfiltered career story, the bets they took, the decisions they made, where they failed, and the lessons that they learned along the way. Welcome to the What Makes You Tick podcast. Hello, I'm Tolu, aka The Podfather, and I'm the host of What Makes You Tick.
Hello, Podfather. Lovely to have you on again. I am Richard Washington, as you well know. I'm the founder of Tick Talent. We're delighted to sponsor this week's podcast. Tolu, I believe we have a very special episode today with someone who has a wonderful connection to you.
Yes.
Tell us more about who we have on this week.
We have my country folk, Andrea Onuigbo, on the podcast. So she is originally Nigerian, but has had a very international life. So ended up in America, lived in lots of places. Very, very cool. Works for Snowflake at the moment. But yeah, had a really, really good career in tech sales after potentially being a lawyer, which is one of the Nigerian Big Four.
Absolutely. I love that part of the podcast where you talked about that. You also talked about that with Michael McKinley. And I just think it's so fascinating to hear about how these different cultures kind of try and shape you, and then how kind of people break away from that, which you've both done. And Andrea's story from being born in Holland, the journey that she's been on, breaking into some very traditional tech businesses with very established cultures in their sales teams, like Oracle, for example. And then what she's managed to achieve is phenomenal. I actually met her and was introduced to her through our good friend David Wilkins.
David Wilkins is a very well connected. And everybody loves David Wilkins, as they should.
Everyone loves David Wilkins. Little side note, SDR leaders of EMEA, the community that's on LinkedIn as well as on Slack, is now up to 1,800 members.
Amazing.
Which is amazing. So
congratulations, David.
And they work together at Snowflake, and he's told me some funny stories about this kind of banter that they had and the relationship they've had. And he said, this is someone you should definitely have on your podcast. So I'm really glad we did. I think she's super honest, right, about the kind of greatest strengths and greatest weaknesses conundrum that people have, which is that she is incredibly hyperfixated on things, which is to her strength, becoming a master at things, but also sometimes to her detriment. And she's had to learn how to do that, as well as to break into, like I say, really established cultures where being different, coming from different places, having different sets of experience, different values, different ways of working isn't normal. And she's managed to establish herself to be a position where she's a senior leader within one of the companies that has the greatest reputation in all of tech, which is Snowflake. So with all that being said, let's roll the VT.
Andrea, welcome to the podcast. It's so good to have you on, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Excited to be here. Thank you.
It's always good to have a fellow Nigerian on the podcast. First question for you, though, is, Andrea, what makes you tick?
What makes me tick? Honestly, I like learning about a lot of different things. So anything that I can hyperfixate on, like very niche, random facts, just to understand how it works, and then be able to extrapolate that into a bigger picture, that's what makes me tick. So what is a good example of that, or something that I learned recently? It's pop culture related, so I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But House of Dragon just dropped, and there's actually a House of Dragon in Sweden, and one of the reps that I have is descended from that. So he kind of walked me through that whole lineage, and that's something that made me tick. And I was like, actually, let's park this one-on-one. Tell me about all of this stuff. And so that's how we got there.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Where do you think that came from? Are there any early memories you have of that?
Yes. I mean, I just hyperfixate on really interesting things I remember when I was in primary school, we had this also, if you gamify something around me gaining knowledge, that's even better. And so, I mean, that's literally how you make kids learn. And so we had um, basically a reading comprehension program where if you read a whole bunch of books, each of them, depending on the size and difficulty, had a number of points. And then if you gained the most points, like in your grade level or in the school, you could have a pizza party because that's always a super great prize for, I don't know, 8-year-olds, stuff like that. So I think that's my earliest memory of. I remember deliberately uh, hiding in my closet during when I'm supposed to be asleep, just reading for the sake of I want to take the test and get all of the points so I
Mm.
can have the pizza party. And I remember my mom the next day obviously knew I was doing this. So I just wrote a tiny note in like my book to say like, "Oh, I'm very proud of you, but like, please go to bed.
Sleep.
Like, you don't need to just you don't need to keep doing this." For like, it was a nice note to be like, "I love you, but like, it's okay
Yeah.
to relax."
Yeah. Wow. And how do you think that has helped you in your career in sales?
Mm, I think it's a double-edged sword in that internal desire to, oh, I want to make sure that I fully understand the scope of this very specific thing.
Mm.
And I also, in conjunction with, I would say I'm not a outwardly competitive person. Like I don't really care
Okay.
what other people do, but for me, as far as the being internally competitive, is that yeah, I want to beat my high score. That's
Yes.
that's kind of my mentality about it. So I would say that has helped me a lot in sales to be yeah, less concerned with other people hitting quota, but more for me and for myself going, how complex was this deal? I'm super proud that I was able to bring, I don't know, all these stakeholders together. If we're talking
Mm.
about the time of being an individual seller. And then now as a sales leader, it's more so really looking at the progression of the folks. And yeah, there's nothing better than being able to brag and say, I was able to fully understand this particular individual and what motivates them, and now they're here.
Mm.
Um, I told you I'm gonna ramble. I'm a yapper. So that's I would say that's the positive side.
Yeah.
The the other part of it is then I would say I'm very overly ambitious with
Okay.
how far I can push myself to reach the high score to continue to learn. And so there's definitely there's not there's a lot of diminishing returns that I
Mm.
need to be aware of there.
Mm. And what have you found useful in terms of practical ways of finding that balance of being super competitive, but knowing that point? I love what you said about the diminishing returns. What have you found useful practically to help you identify that point and know when to start pulling back?
Um, well, my body tells me because that's one thing. Um,
Okay.
I I mean, and this I think everyone, if you're familiar with like being a highly sensitive person and what that entails is at least for me when I'm pushing past my threshold in regards to stress and all of those sorts of things, I actually they're very clear cut signs for me physically of oh okay, this brain fog is not just you didn't have your slight addiction to Coke Zero. That's not actually what's happening here. It's
Okay.
you're too tired. You need to step away from this. So things like that. So practically, that's great because I'm the type of person that will just keep going. And if there's actually physical manifestation of, oh, why don't I remember this very basic thing? I
Mm.
think I am too tired for this. Let's step away. That's one.
Mm.
Um, and the other thing is I definitely gravitate towards less type A people. I was going to use a different adjective, but I would say it's a positive thing to be a type A person.
Yeah.
Maybe more hinged people, because sometimes it gets on the point of being slightly unhinged with that,
Mm.
who definitely are really good about that separation. And so just kind of checking in with those folks, and I have those folks from a work perspective, but also personally to kind of be like, I'm not going too far, am I? And I think that's always helpful.
Yeah, I think that's such a good thing because I think sometimes we also ignore some of those body signs, and it's people that can tell us from the outside, like, hey, no, now it's really time to pull back. So I love that. How did you end up in sales?
Actually, this is a good connection because I thought of one person. So I have two sisters. My youngest sister, though, is 9 years younger than me. So age jokes for days, which I really enjoy. But I think it's really humbling
Mm.
when a 20-year-old comes up to you and is like, "Are you okay? Like, are you taking care of yourself?" That's, I think, when you know, maybe I do need
Yeah.
to um, take a step back. So I think that that's one person I most definitely will chat with consistently because I'm very close to my sisters, and
Mm.
being if she's asking those questions, then I'm like, all right, maybe we close the laptop at a
Yeah.
reasonable time today. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, what led me into sales? So I would say it was a happy accident. Um, and I was kind of, I wouldn't say swindled into it, but it was definitely some false advertising
Okay.
or dubious advertising. When we moved to the States, us, all coming in as immigrants, we don't know all of the different things that the folks who've grown up around know about. So I remember I hadn't gotten a job because having Nigerian parents, it's like study, 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 get into a good university, whatever, up until the summer before university. And it's like, so how are you gonna, help pay for this? And I was like, oh, I thought, okay, that's fine. So I was looking for a job, and
Yeah.
I got a snail mail vector sales and marketing, and it was said all of this stuff about how amazing it is, and it's actually well known. Essentially, I thought it would be an office job, and it was higher than
Okay.
minimum wage, like working at Jamba Juice or something. So that for me sounded amazing because there would be AC as well. And we get there, and then we start doing like team building exercises in like a pretty descript like nondescript office building. And I still don't really know what we're doing. And it's just a whole bunch of like 17 and 18-year-olds like doing trust falls and stuff like that. We get to the end of the day and they go, cool, write down everyone that you know. And I'm like, all right, like this is weird. I guess this is another one of these exercises. And they're
Yeah.
like, amazing, you're going to call those people. I said, what are you talking about? And it was so I don't know if you've ever heard of Cutco knives, but essentially it's door to door.
Okay.
It's door to door cutlery sales, but very good cutlery. The product is great. I will always say that the product is great. My mom still uses those knives and those scissors. They're amazing. Just the lack of transparency as to what it
Yeah.
was initially was crazy to me because at that point, like I'm invested. I've bonded with these other people about our biggest fears. And so now, I mean, wrote down everyone we know. Now, what's going to happen? I guess I'm going door to door to sell kitchen
Yeah.
knives. I guess that's what's happening. So that was a very interesting experience. Also, most of my network at that time when I wrote it down are, yeah, also immigrants. So they're not going to spend $1,000 on a knife. What are you
Yeah.
talking about? So it was a great opportunity for me with my American friends with disposable income to
Mm.
then go, hey, I'm at your house ostensibly with the weapon. That's amazing. How can we turn this around and have you drop $1,000 on a kitchen knife set? So there's a lot of storytelling that worked really well. You go, hey, I know Jimmy's going to college. That's going to be so hard, empty nesting. But wouldn't it be great if you were like carving an amazing Thanksgiving dinner when he comes back?
Mm.
Think about
Mm.
how wonderful that memory would be with these bomb ass knives. That's what that was, basically. So yeah, that was my first foray into sales, and then I swore to myself I would never do that again.
Okay.
Made a ton of money doing it that summer, and then I kind of left that behind. Fast forward, um, I think you're probably well aware of this, but there are three tracks uh, as far as what my job trajectory needed to be: doctor, lawyer, engineer. I was pre-law, got into law
Okay.
school, was super burnt out um, after my final year. So I said, I'm going to take a gap year. And then my father said to me, well, you're not actually European. So you need to figure out what you're going to do because a gap year is not for people like us. So
Wow.
that's when I showed up last minute to a career fair and was like, cool, I need to do something before I go to law school, I guess. And that's I showed up with my CV and I walked around and there was one other Black person there, and you do the head nod of okay, so it
Yeah,
was the
yeah.
recruiter for Oracle, and that's all she
Wow.
wrote there. Like that's how I got like because he looked at my resume and was like, you're a pre-law, very clearly, and I was like, yeah, I mean I'm going to law school. He's like, that's so
Yeah.
great, just don't mention that in your screens or anything. Have fun, and that's I'm
Wow.
still connected to him to this day, and we'll chat here and there. But yeah, he's the reason that I stepped into tech sales specifically.
And did you still go to law school, or was that kind of it? You were like, I'm not
Oh
going.
no, no. Uh oh, that's a whole other fun story that I will try and be succinct about. We'll see. Um I did a pre-law program during one of my summers while I was in undergrad, and
Mm.
it was a joint venture between NYU Law and Harvard Law. And I remember calling my mom and being like, this is so amazing. This is so great. Like all of this stuff. I really want to step into public interest law and work with asylum seekers and refugees. And then she just looked at me and was like, girl, what are you talking about? What do you mean you're not going to law school to be in public interest? I was like, this is crazy. This whole time, I thought you knew that that was the reason I was going into it, not to earn
Mm.
a six-figure salary, because I'm a liberal arts girly. Like I minored in social work. I don't know what we
Yeah.
expected. So that I already knew for me was going to be my concentration when I went
Okay.
into law school, and then the specter of having six-figure debt to then be severely underpaid was like a bit stressful for me.
Mm.
When I then stepped into Oracle and realized, oh, in a couple of years, if I care to be that ambitious, I can potentially earn a six-figure income, and you definitely don't need
Mm.
a degree to do this. Actually, to my chagrin,
That works.
and that's
Yeah.
just I mean, to my chagrin in a lot of ways, because that's just me. I like to be kind of a know-it-all. I'm like, oh, you don't actually need to be smart to be successful in sales, and that's just really why did I go and do all of that work in undergrad
Yeah.
anyway if I didn't need to do all
Yeah.
of that? Anyway, so it was kind of me weighing the options, and I was like, cool, I'll try this out for a year and then see. And then there were also came up that year some family obligations financially, and so it just kind of made sense to go through that. I think the through line there for me, other than uh, is that I do enjoy the storytelling component of
Mm.
litigation and the narrative that you have to put together in order to be persuasive,
Mm.
and then seeing way less stakes. Does this person get to live in a country and have freedom and all
Mm.
of those sorts of things, or did you close the deal or not close the deal? I much rather prefer to
Yeah.
just that be a sales transaction than actually, severe impact on someone's life in that way. So I also liked the
Mm.
slightly lower stakes as well.
Mm. Mm. I think it's such an interesting dynamic. I think with the cultural side of things. So I'm Nigerian too. So we have what I call the big four. So the three that you mentioned, but also accounting seems to be quite
Oh yeah,
acceptable
that's
to
true.
like Nigerian parents. And both my parents are big four, so engineer, lawyer, and none of my siblings are, because my parents were quite like, you have to go to uni, but after that, like, you broadly do what you want to do. So I got quite lucky with that. But
Uh,
it seems like there's an interesting tension with you where like the Nigerian parents pushed you to the job fair, which found your career. Then at the same time, it makes you think about your options in a slightly different way. So how do you balance that cultural tension? Because I think there are a lot of people, and I've talked to some of my friends who are like Indian, for example, or Chinese, and they have similar kind of approaches. So how do you balance that tension between those two things?
I mean, I think in hindsight, in hindsight now, I'm like, oh, hey, mom, who helped pay your mortgage? Exactly. So I know I'm not a doctor or anything, but I think we're good. Um,
Yeah.
So that's just me being a smart aleck about it. Um, I think I also would say me being the eldest also helped in that dynamic as well of forging that path to say, because I wasn't just thinking of myself, I was also thinking of my sisters in particular. As I said, I'm really close to them and saying, well, like if I have this difficult conversation, because even then being like, wait, I didn't know, like I'm already wanting to be a lawyer. What do you mean that I have to be a very specific type of one?
Specific,
Who's
yeah,
doing the
yeah,
practice here? Right. And so I think for
yeah,
me, that was the first realization of, oh, I'm going to need to challenge this expectation. And, and I think I'm in the best position to do it, at least within my family dynamic.
yeah.
Um, I don't know that if, yeah, I don't know if like my doctor sister, my middle sister, I don't know that she was in the same place. Like I mean I know because we had this conversation actually multiple times where if it was left up to her, she would have just been a teacher, and she is an excellent
Wow.
teacher. Um,
Hmm.
but I don't think in the way that our dynamics work with our parents in our family unit, it would have worked for her to be like, actually, I'm not going to med school. Um,
Yeah.
so I think for me, how did I find that balance? I'm very comfortable challenging when it's something that I'm super convicted about. So it wasn't an easy road, but I think once I had that realization when I was an undergrad, it was a consistent conversation with my
Hmm.
parents, and then it eventually got to this point. Okay, now acceptance. However, comma, my mom still was like, "So when are you gonna get your master's? Like, have you thought about that? Because you know."
We have all had those questions. I think I'm one of the like least educated people in my family because I don't have a master's. I'm like, can you chill?
I was like, "Why are we collecting degrees? It's not
Yeah,
necessary."
right. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. I think that one of the things that you said is, about, and what I took from it is almost like the proof helps. So I feel like if you stick it out, and if you keep doing what you're doing, you are successful in that. Like people generally come around, because at first they're like, he's an analyst. What's an analyst? And then when they see you climb the ranks, they're like, oh,
Mm.
my nephew's an analyst. And it's like, now everybody's proud. So I think sometimes you just got to stick it through and keep going with it, that thing that you're convicted about, because you have to live that career. Your parents aren't actually going to do it.
Exactly. And that maybe just to add to that, I think outside of, I mean, I think that's a lot of folks stepping out of your parent shadow is because this was kind of a happy medium that I learned to love. There
Mm,
was that financial obligation as I spoke of. I think for me, there was a little bit of like simmering resentment that I've worked out in therapy, obviously, because we're healthy here.
yeah.
About, oh, like at the same time, my journey in sales was not an easy one. And knowing
Mm,
that there was that outside of the cultural expectation from, let's just say, I want to be able to brag about my kid and they have something that
yeah.
I view that is
Yes.
culturally significant. It's also the expectation to, and I think rightfully so, to give back towards your family and support, especially being the oldest.
Mm,
Um, so I would always say, like, it's still kind of back to the point that you made earlier of like, ultimately, it is you, it's your life. You're the one that's going to deal with the consequences of those actions. And so I think there's a lot of inner work that needs to happen around, is it worth it for you? And
mm,
I can look back on my 20s and say, you know, despite the fact that a lot of it was driven by being hyper aware of the expectations placed on me versus
mm,
maybe delaying some of my own desires and dreams, etc. I'm still happy with that balance because ultimately that's me being able to contribute in this way towards my family is core to my own
mm,
values and what
mm,
makes me happy. but another person, and I still had resentment about that, even though I was like, I chose this. Um, so I do think that yeah, you really do need to do that inner work. Otherwise, it's not 1,000% going to be your parents' fault that you decided to do something to
No.
please them. And you need to, yeah, you just need to do that inner work. And
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah.
I look back and go, yeah, ultimately still worth it. But it was not,
Yeah.
it was not a very clear,
Yes.
clear pro cons list for me initially when I looked back.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I know. I totally understand that. And just to go back to something that you said about it wasn't necessarily an easy journey with sales. What were some of those challenges that you had, and how did you overcome those?
Where to begin? I think a lot of it, again, has to do with my own temperament, and some of the expectations I have. I'm quite an introverted person. Like, I wish, and there were tons of folks when I was in high school, who were like, "Do you want to be a programmer? Like, you would be so like it would be so great for you." And I was like, "I wish that I could do all of the coding," but I absolutely hated it in my honors class doing the coding,
Okay.
because that
Okay.
actually fits more of my temperament, and I get energy from being able to do focused work separately. And then I need that time to internally process. Um, so that was when, and then just doing anything and being very, improvising. Ooh, one way to just really stress me out, go off script. We decided to do this, and you're like, actually, I'm going to do the opposite. And I was like, great, thank
Yeah.
you so much, which is very, very fun, seeing as like you cannot control customer behavior very obviously.
Mm.
So those were two things that I already knew that were not well suited given the summer that I was a kitchen knife salesperson.
Mm.
And I think the other elements that I found to be difficult is, in the space, there are very few people who will who look like me, who have my background, etc. And I think we're a long way if we're talking about women in sales and having community in that, which is
Mm.
wonderful.
Mm.
Um, but I think, and I don't think I'm being blasphemous by saying, when there's a certain sales culture within Oracle as well, and I think it suits certain types of sellers.
Mm.
But it really it might be better now, but when I was there, it was not inclusive of other types. And so, being a young professional trying to figure out how to sell, already stepping out of my comfort zone in the sense of having to stretch myself, generally speaking,
Mm.
and then going, okay, this is the Sandler way of selling, which, no shade on Sandler. Great. It worked for a
Mm.
while and we're
Mm.
evolving.
Mm.
But that was another challenge in the role itself. And then the feeling of, I can relate to folks always. I've moved around a lot. There's always some commonality in some sort of way, but knowing very clearly there's one of me, and not in the like special snowflake standpoint, but very clearly like, oh, we're
Mm.
in a pretty homogenous environment.
Mm.
So those, I think, were the two biggest things for me, if we're
Mm.
talking competency wise, and then the environment.
Mm. And how did you, like, what were some of the things that were helpful for you in terms of overcoming that and still being able to be successful?
Um, I think on the competency piece, it was, um, really just having a good group of folks who invested into me. Like I
Mm.
said, I think those were the people who were very encouraging of the slight, sometimes unhinged ambition that I would have to be successful, but realizing it was like, I'm not fitting in this archetype of what works here as far as like the traditional selling
Mm.
motion, and them kind
Mm.
of taking a step back, being like, you don't need to do that. Um, you don't need to do that. I think that's just what I needed to hear. Now, did they have ideas on what I needed to do? No, because they were not Black women who
Yeah.
have my background and all of that type of stuff. But at least hearing them say that you don't need to fit into this box was very helpful and reassuring, and gave me the confidence to kind of experiment with my approach. Um, and then I would say the thing around finding community was just being intentional in when folks would come in that maybe didn't fit in the majority of connecting and making sure that we did not feel isolated in that experience. And I don't just mean like as far as like cultural background where you grew up and race. I
Yeah.
just mean like even the fun divide of, oh, I'm a liberal arts background and all of these people came from business, and so they have a very different perspective coming in here, and we're like,
Mm.
How about the story that we want to tell in this cold called script that we've put together? And like, hello, you have 30 seconds, guys. But still being able to have fun and play and
Yeah.
find like-minded folks, as well as still being challenged, when we needed to just actually be more like the folks who had that traditional business background and say, yeah, this is how we really go in for and ask these qualifying questions, things like that.
And at what point in your career did you start leading people?
How it's formally, or maybe I'll start informally. I mean, I already knew that long term, like field sales was not the life for me. I don't, we already talked about maybe people are getting a sense of my need for control, which is fun. And then being out in the fields, having to fly to middle of nowhere, Missouri, and you're like, wait, wrong airport, wrong Kansas City. Oh, great. Those sorts of fun
Wow.
things. Amazing. Anyway, that's a side story. I'm losing the plot, but so I knew I wanted to get that experience for myself.
Yes.
But I knew that inherently where I would find the most joy is more finding a way to enable people to be successful to do that rather than being the one that is center on stage. That's just not where I thrive. And I started to see, and then also being an older sister, as I've mentioned a couple of times, inherently you give people unsolicited advice, whether they ask for it or not. And so then people start coming to you and you're like, oh, shoot, okay, all right, maybe I do know a thing or two. So I think that was always kind of the longer term path for me, is when will I pivot into doing that formally? I just thought that like as a human being, I would be more of an adult and have had sort of stuff figured out before I stepped into it, because it seemed like a big girl job. And when the opportunity came to step into it formally, it was very much not on my radar, not on my plan. I was like, oh, I thought I would be in my 30s and then I would step into it. Like now now stepping into it now, I'm like, not sure. Do I have enough experience? All of those sorts of questions came into play.
How was that transition into formal leadership? And because I think sometimes it's not quite what we expect. So how did you find that transition?
Well, I got the job offer in March of 2020. So it was during the pandemic when I became a leader for the first time.
Wow.
And what was so fun about that is that I was supposed to relocate to Amsterdam. So I was born in the Netherlands and I have EU citizenship, Dutch citizenship. So I think that's also part of the reason. I always jokingly say, I was like, oh, maybe Andrea would be good for this role because she is single and alone and does have EU citizenship, so she can make this jump, because I didn't, in fact, apply to manage in the United States, not in Europe. So when I did get that job offer, I went through that process. I was excited. I had not sold directly in Europe before. I had other markets, but not Europe. And so that was exciting. Challenge then being, cool, while I did know the sales motion because I'd been an AE there and all of that stuff, I didn't know the stakeholder group at all. They just knew me
Mm.
as an AE, but not as an SDR leader. And um, everything was based out of Amsterdam or Sydney at that moment in time due to the pandemic and just travel and all of that. There was also me having to still be in the States and manage remotely
Mm.
during that time. So this is where I was saying the pro cons list was really, I think I was just young and dumb and said, oh, absolutely, 2 a.m. calls every day. I
Yeah.
will do that for
Fine. Yeah.
however long. And that ended up being a year of
Wow.
2 a.m. to noon, just to make sure that I overlapped in at 1 hour so that I had all of the time zones together, because that's always really difficult. And then
Mm.
I would take a break, and then in the evenings chat with Sydney. So I did that for a year. So yeah, to take it back, I think there were a lot of different things in this particular step into leadership that made it difficult. It wasn't just um, oh, new market, learning all of the things. It was also the element of how am I going to build out a function, because we did not have a sales development function existing there, and then build that trust and build camaraderie remotely, and build out processes remotely, and then do that with a horrible sleep schedule and
Mm.
being very isolated from my team. So
Mm.
those were kind of all of the challenges. I think, yeah, being young and dumb actually to my benefit in like just leaning in and being like, I'm
Mm.
gonna do this, as we talked about, of just blindly stepping into a challenge because I want to challenge myself, served me well. Because I don't think, like looking at it now, I don't think that I would make that choice ever again. Yeah.
And you mentioned with building camaraderie and all your processes and things remotely. How did you make that work?
Well, what was wonderful is I had really, so it wasn't just me that was managing. We had also another manager that was based out in Amsterdam. Her name was Emily, um, who became kind of like partner in crime, working together on that. And she came in externally with a ton of um, leadership experience, and is like is a project manager, to be honest, in the way that she thinks about things. So when it came to process, I think that's where building off of her experience at smaller companies was super helpful. And then just her being a more project oriented person helped us with process a lot. And then as far as more of the camaraderie piece, uh, despite not being super well connected with maybe the sales folks knowing me as like a new leader, I had been at the company a while and had connected with a lot of folks. So I understood how to build culture. And what was nice is that while we weren't a fully remote company previous to the pandemic, we did have a significant portion. So
Mm.
we already had customs and practices that we just made work for us, and built it around that way.
Mm. Mm. And what would you say is the biggest lesson that you've learned as a leader over the last 4 years that you've been leading people formally?
It's a really good one. Biggest lesson. I think the one that maybe it's not the biggest lesson, but the one that I have to constantly remind myself of,
Mm.
because it's difficult for me to separate. It's just like people are gonna do what they're gonna do. And I don't mean to like sound cynical about it.
Mm.
But it helps me kind of remove this, again, burden that no one put on but me, around wanting to be able to help a person step into their full potential, or be whatever
Mm.
their goal is.
Mm.
And you can only do so much. Like if someone wants to learn the hard way, amazing. They're going to
Mm.
learn it that way. And I think that process of letting go is very difficult for me,
Mm.
or has been very difficult for me. So I think if I look at myself in the beginning of the journey, that led to a lot of overinvestment and
Yeah.
and the diminishing returns like we talked about earlier. And now I think I'm at a point where there's still one or two of those folks that you're just like, oh, but no, do not
Yeah,
step in there. They're gonna
yeah.
learn.
Leave them to it. Yeah. Do you know what? That is probably one of the hardest lessons, I think, is that sometimes stuff is going to go wrong, and sometimes you have to let it, and you have to. That's how people learn the lesson. Sometimes I think that is really, really tough. Really, really tough. As we close, we have a closing tradition, which is called our Tickfire Questions. So, are you ready for our Tickfire Questions?
I mean, yes, kind of. Let's see.
Get your Coke in, and then we will go. What are the top 3 things you look for when you are hiring someone into your team?
Yes, top 3 things. Number 1, self-awareness. Do I need to explain? It's probably super quick. Yeah, so self-awareness. The other thing, coachability is huge. And I don't know how to, a slight chip on their shoulder.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll leave it
Okay.
at that. I can elaborate if you'd like
I
me to,
understand.
but yes.
No, I understand.
Yeah,
Like that thing that drives them to win, basically, like competitive edge.
exactly.
Because, yeah, got you. What's your favorite interview question to ask, and why?
My favorite interview question to ask is, my favorite one when we're doing like a skills-based test is, it's not that innovative. Everyone asks it, but I just go, imagine I am your teenage cousin. I want you to do that pitch all over again and talk to me like I'm your cousin, like I'm a teenager.
Okay.
So that's always fun, and additional bonus points if people actually can show their personality in that way. That's why that's my favorite.
Cool. If you were to host a podcast, who would be your first guest?
So the first name that popped in my mind, and I'm not going to be able to justify it, is Dua Lipa, only because I know she has a podcast, and I love
Cool.
her. So it has nothing to do with anything leadership related at all.
That's fine. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. Whatever your podcast would be, that is acceptable. What's the best advice you've ever been given?
Best advice I've been given. Yeah, that's tough. I've gotten a lot of good advice. I'm just going to think about the most recent advice I've gotten to make it easier on me. And I think it's just to do less. Again, with my personality, that checks out.
Cool. Perfect. And at this stage of your journey, what's your definition of success?
For me, it's being challenged in a sustainable way with what I'm doing, and kind of harking back to that same sort of feeling that I got when I was reading in my room late at night, and just again in a sustainable way. So maybe not always late at night, but that sort of excitement, being and challenge, being able to do that and have fun with it, at the same time having the energy to be present and not just work but other aspects of my life as well. Live that fully. Yeah.
Okay. And last question. If you could go back to the you at the start of your career, what would you say to her?
Yeah, I actually would take that person's advice to do less. I think most of the time, the overinvestment was not super necessary, and I would have probably gotten the same results. Yeah.
It's almost like find that point of diminishing returns earlier.
But I think a lot of folks say is I wouldn't change anything because I don't think there's any other way for me to have learned that lesson. So, yeah.
Amazing. Andrea, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I've really enjoyed hearing your journey, and I know others will too. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed, hearing me be long-winded in all of my answers. Hopefully someone took something from it.
I think you were fine. That was good. Thanks, Andrea.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of What Makes You Tick. I hope that you enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed having the conversation.
Absolutely. There's so much value in learning from virtual mentors, people that have already gone through incredible careers and they've got wonderful stories and lessons that they can share for you to have a bigger and better career in tech. And if you like this sort of content, we've also got a newsletter that we publish weekly called Growth Magnet, all about tech startups, leadership, scaling and performance. We'll put a link in the show notes and it'll be fantastic to see your comments on our next post.